Okay, Los Angeles. When you think of LA, what comes to mind? Glamour, right? Innovation, Hollywood, just immense wealth.
Absolutely. Glittering skyscrapers, that whole lifestyle. It's seen as the American dream for many.
But then, just a few blocks away from all that shine, you hit this really stark reality.
One of the largest concentrations of unhoused people in the whole country.
Right there, centered in that neighborhood everyone knows the name of, Skid Row.
It's such a profound contrast, isn't it? A really, really complex problem right in the heart of, well, one of the world's richest cities.
It really is. And today, that's what we're diving into, that complexity. The often painful history of homelessness in LA, focusing hard on Skid Row.
Yeah, trying to understand how it developed this way.
Exactly. How did we get here, and why is it still such a persistent challenge? We've gathered quite a stack of sources, historical reports, human rights analyses, urban studies, journalistic accounts.
The real mix.
Yeah, the goal is to pull out the key insights, give you a clear, informed, and hopefully engaging look at this. You'll definitely find some surprising facts, maybe gain a deeper perspective. So, yeah, let's unpack it.
Well, what's surprising right off the bat, I think, is the name itself. Skid Row. It didn't actually start in Los Angeles.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I guess I just assumed it was an LA thing. Where did it come from then?
It traces back to Seattle, Washington, way back like the 1850s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Picture this. They had something called a skid road. And it was, well, literally a path made of greased logs.
Greased logs, like actually
Yeah.
greased.
Sometimes with bacon grease, the sources say, or even salmon oil. They used it to drag timber, filled logs from First Hill down to the sawmills near the water.
Bacon grease.
Yeah.
Wow. That is quite an image.
Right.
So not glamorous at all. Very specific origin.
Not at all. And naturally, the area around the skid road, it became populated by the lumberjacks, the mill workers.
Right, the guys doing the work.
Exactly. And soon enough, saloons, brothels, they all sprang up to cater to these workers. The sources call it an unsavory district.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
So that name, Skid Road, or it morphed into Skid Row, it just became shorthand for any city neighborhood that was, the last resort for the destitute.
And that caught on nationally.
Oh, yeah. By the mid-20th century, you had skid rows in dozens of American cities. New York City's Bowery, for instance, became known as Skid Row in the 1940s.
But LA's is the one that really stuck, hasn't it? It's
Yeah.
arguably the most famous, still in the same spot for over a century. So how did LA get its Skid Row? What were the seeds here?
Well, for Los Angeles, it really comes down to two big things initially. The railroad and agriculture.
Okay.
Back in the 1870s, LA managed to convince the Transcontinental Railroad to extend a line down into Southern California. And this region was already, booming with fruit orchards, vineyards.
Right, the agricultural wealth.
Hmm.
And railroads, they need flat land, right?
Precisely. So the tracks, the freight depots, they got built near the Los Angeles River.
And that location drew people in.
It became a magnet. A huge hub for seasonal workers, agricultural workers, railroad workers, mostly young single men moving around for work.
Transient workers.
Exactly. And historian Donald Spivak, he notes this. All of these transitory workers needed places to live.
And the area around the train stations began to fill in.
With small hotels, bars, and other facilities to serve them. So these places, the cheap hotels, the SROs, single-room occupancy hotels, the saloons, the brothels, they became the neighborhood's founding institutions.
So it started with this transient, mostly male workforce. But then things shifted. The Great Depression, the Dust Bowl in the 30s, that must have had a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely. It spurred this massive westward migration, people looking for work, looking for a better life in California.
But LA couldn't absorb everyone.
No, there just wasn't enough work. So many ended up sleeping rough in train cars, in what they called hobo encampments, or crammed into those SROs, which were often already pretty run down.
This is when it starts to become less transient.
Yeah, this period, the 1930s, that's really seen as the beginning of what Spivak calls a permanent underclass in the community. It was already becoming Skid Row, home to, believe it or not, maybe as many as 10,000 homeless people even back then.
10,000. That's staggering for the 1930s, and things kept changing, right? What about after the wars? World War II, Korea.
Yeah, another wave. Many returning soldiers, sadly, were dealing with immense trauma, PTSD, alcoholism, drug addiction.
And they found their way to Skid Row.
It seems so. The existing services, maybe the anonymity, it became a sort of refuge. But by the 1960s, the area's reputation, well, it was seen as dangerous rundown. It started deterring businesses from investing in the broader downtown area.
Okay, so the city decides it needs to clean up downtown.
Sort of. They started enforcing stricter housing standards, which, on the surface sounds positive.
But the reality was different.
The consequence was demolition. Roughly half of the SROs, those vital cheap housing units, they were torn down. That's about 7,500 units gone between the mid-60s and mid-70s, all under the banner of urban renewal.
Wow, 7,500 units of last resort housing just wiped out.
Mhm.
But LA did something different after that, didn't it, compared to other cities?
Yeah, this is a really crucial point. Most cities were trying to clear out their Skid Row areas completely, but Los Angeles, according to Spivak again, made a conscious decision not to do that in 1976.
So they didn't try to eliminate it. What was the policy then?
The policy was actually to preserve a place for extremely low-income people to live.
Okay, so partly humanitarian, maybe, ensuring there was somewhere for the poorest people.
Perhaps, but it was definitely also what's called a containment strategy.
Containment, meaning
Meaning, essentially, kept this population confined within Skid Row's 50 blocks, the official name is Central City East, and discouraged them from, quote, wandering through the rest of downtown.
so keep the problem contained so the rest of downtown could attract investors.
That seems to be the logic, yeah. And the sources we looked at mainly focus on how this policy played out, rather than detailing specific opposition at the time. It was presented as a deliberate choice.
And did that containment policy affect who lived there?
Oh, dramatically. Over the 70s and 80s, the demographics just completely shifted. It went from being mostly white and elderly
Yeah.
to predominantly black and male. By the late 80s, Skid Row was majority black, a huge change from just a decade earlier when it was something like 67% white and 21% black.
And today?
Still predominantly black and male, though with more women and children now than before. And this disparity is stark of. You look at LA County overall, African Americans are about 8% of the population.
With 34% of the homeless population?
Exactly. A massive overrepresentation. It's impossible to ignore the racial dimension here. And veterans, by the way, still make up about 20% of Skid Row residents today.
That racial disparity is key. And there was another huge factor around this time, wasn't there? Changes in mental health care, deinstitutionalization.
Yes, a massive factor. Starting back in the 50s, there were growing concerns. State hospital costs, inhumane conditions. There's a big push to move mental health care out of these large institutions.
And into community centers.
That was the idea. The Community Health Centers Act in '63 promised federal money for these local centers.
But the funding didn't last, did it?
No, federal funding dried up in 1981. Many of those promise centers never even got built.
And there was legislation in California, too.
Right. The Lanterman-Petra-Short Act of 1967, it limited involuntary psychiatric holds. Basically, you could only be held if you were clearly a danger to yourself or others, or gravely disabled.
Which sounds reasonable in principle, protecting rights.
Absolutely. But the unintended consequences were huge. You had thousands of patients discharged.
With nowhere to go.
Often, yes. Lacking adequate support, maybe relying on federal welfare checks that just weren't enough to cover housing. So you saw a huge increase in the number of homeless people struggling with serious mental illness.
And many ended up in Skid Row.
They gravitated there, yeah. Because it already had some social services, even if they were strained, it became the place people landed.
The numbers are pretty shocking.
By 1984, some estimates put rates of serious mental illness among Skid Row's homeless as high as 50%. For single women, closer to 90% in some studies, it got so bad the LA County Jail essentially became a de facto mental health institution.
Just cycling people through the system.
Ah.
Okay, so we've got the historical roots, the railroads, the depression, containment, deinstitutionalization.
Yeah.
How did this all combine to create the crisis we see today? What about the more recent factors, say, from the 80s onwards?
Yeah, the 80s saw what people call the new homelessness. It was this confluence of factors: rising unemployment, good-paying manufacturing jobs disappearing, replaced by low-wage service work.
Income inequality growing.
Definitely. And the financialization of real estate housing becoming more of an investment commodity than, shelter. Plus, you had the crack cocaine epidemic hitting hard, the HIV/AIDS crisis, all pushing more people onto the streets.
In Los Angeles today, it has the highest percentage of chronically homeless people among major U.S. cities, right?
That's what the data shows. And a massive part of that is the housing affordability crisis. It's extreme.
The shortage is huge, isn't it? Like 500,000 units.
An estimated 500,000 affordable units short. Think about that. Even median income households are often paying nearly half their income just on rent. It's unsustainable.
And specific policies make it worse.
Policies like California's Ellis Act, it lets landlords evict tenants basically by saying they're going out of business. And of course, the rise of short-term rentals like Airbnb, taking potential long-term rentals off the market.
And we have to circle back to the racial dimension here, too.
Absolutely critical. You have this history of explicitly racist housing policies, things like racial covenants preventing sales to minorities, blockbusting, where agents scared white owners into selling cheap, then sold high to black families.
Creating segregated neighborhoods and limiting wealth building.
Exactly. And the legacy of that discrimination continues today. It's a huge reason why Black Angelenos are 4 times more likely to experience homelessness. It's systemic.
Which brings us to how the city, particularly law enforcement, has responded more recently. It feels like there's been a long era of criminalization.
There really has. It goes back decades. Remember Police Chief Daryl Gates in 1987, backed by Mayor Tom Bradley then? He launched these sweeps to clear, quote, filth and obstruction from Skid Row.
Though not everyone was on board even then.
No, the city attorney at the time, James K. Hahn, famously refused to prosecute people just for being poor, which is quite a statement.
But the crackdowns continued in different forms.
Oh, yeah. In the mid-2000s, you had the scandal of patient dumping. Hospitals literally discharging homeless patients onto Skid Row because they lacked resources for proper aftercare, just putting them back on the street.
Creating that cycle between jail, the hospital, the street.
Exactly. Then in 2006, Police Chief William Bratton brought in the Safer Cities Initiative. 50 extra officers deployed to Skid Row.
The zero-tolerance approach.
Zero tolerance for minor offenses, jaywalking, littering, loitering, stuff like that. Proponents said it reduced crime.
But the critics.
Critics pointed to soaring arrest numbers, like 27,000 arrests between 2005 and 2009. They argued it just incarcerated people, didn't solve homelessness, and actually made it harder to get housing later because now they had a criminal record.
And this approach continues today with things like anti-camping laws, the sweeps.
Right, municipal codes like 41.1 ED, the anti-sitting lying law, or 56.11 about personal property in public spaces, they're used systematically to criminalize being unhoused.
And those sweeps, the human cost sounds devastating based on the accounts we have.
It's brutal. We hear stories. People losing everything, identification, medication, family photos, even, the ashes of loved ones. One woman, Michelle, lost all her underclothes, her shoes. Another guy, Harvey, everything he owned after 24 years on the street, gone in a sweep. Sandra lost irreplaceable family photos.
Just swept up and destroyed, often by heavy equipment like bulldozers.
Yeah. And experts, human rights groups, people like Becky Dennison from Venice Community Housing, they're unequivocal. Criminalization clearly does not work.
It's cruel, expensive, and ineffective, she says.
Exactly. It just displaces people, doesn't get them housed. It makes finding work or housing harder. Human Rights Watch put it plainly. Getting people into housing or keeping them in their housing is the only way to end houselessness. Pushing people around doesn't solve anything.
And then, right when things seemed like they couldn't get more complex, COVID-19 hit.
Yeah, 2020, that brought a whole new level of urgency, didn't it?
How did the pandemic specifically impact this population?
Well, it just exposed their extreme vulnerability, limited access to hygiene, crowded living conditions, perfect storm for infectious disease. And LA already had a history of outbreaks like Hep A, tuberculosis among the unhoused, so the fear was immense.
There was that big state initiative, Project Roomkey.
Right, Governor Newsom launched Project Roomkey. The goal was ambitious. House 15,000 homeless Californians temporarily in hotels, motels. LA County set a similar goal. It was a huge effort.
But how successful was it, really?
Well, it was certainly an exceptional effort, but the progress was uneven. They fell short of the goals. And criticisms arose about equity, whether it was adequately serving Black individuals or those with disability.
And the economic impact of the pandemic.
Massive job losses. Even with eviction moratoriums in place for a while, so many people, especially in low-income communities of color, were suddenly facing eviction. The threat of the homeless population swelling even further was very real.
And funding for services took a hit, too.
Yeah, Measure H, a key local funding source for homeless services, was projected to lose something like $200 million because of the economic downturn. So fewer resources, just as the need was potentially exploding.
Okay, so after tracing this incredibly complex, often, frankly, grim history, where do things stand now? What's the path forward? Is there any sense of change?
Well, there does seem to be a shift in public opinion in LA. More support, generally, for actually addressing homelessness. And significantly, the city formally reversed that old containment policy back in 2016. The aim now is supposedly citywide services, not just concentrating everything in Skid Row.
But what kind of services? We hear a lot about shelters, temporary housing,
Mm.
like Mayor Bass's Inside Safe program, moving people from encampments into hotels.
Right, and those efforts offer immediate relief, which is important, getting people off the street into a room.
But are they the long-term solution?
That's the big question. They are very expensive, they're not really sustainable as a permanent fix, and often the people living in these temporary settings describe them as feeling restrictive, almost like a prison, with lots of rules, isolation. It's not a stable home.
And it doesn't necessarily lead to permanent housing.
Often not. It's a temporary stopgap. It doesn't address the root causes or provide that long-term stability people need.
So if temporary shelters aren't the answer, what does the research say works? What's the most effective approach?
The evidence is actually really consistent on this. Permanent supportive housing. That's the model that works best for chronic homelessness.
Meaning stable housing plus services.
Exactly. Providing actual housing, an apartment, a home, combined with wraparound social services, mental health care, substance abuse treatment, job support, whatever the individual needs.
And this is proven to work, even in LA.
Yes. LA had a pilot program called Project 50. They took 50 of the most vulnerable people from Skid Row and got them into permanent supportive housing. It was highly successful. People stayed housed, and it actually saved money compared to the cost of emergency services, jail time, hospital visits.
So if we know what works, what are the big recommendations from experts to actually scale this up, to really tackle the crisis?
Okay, a few key things come up consistently. First, and maybe most fundamentally, framing housing as a basic human right. That needs to be the core principle, echoing the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Makes sense. What else, policy-wise?
Stronger protections for renters. Things like repealing laws that limit rent control, like the Costa-Hawkins Act. Amending or repealing the Ellis Act that allows those no-fault evictions. And crucially, providing a right to counsel a lawyer for tenants facing eviction. That makes a huge difference.
Okay, renter protection. What about actually building more housing, that 500,000 unit shortfall?
Yeah, increasing the supply of genuinely affordable housing is massive. Strategies include incentivizing development on vacant land specifically for low-cost housing, maybe using state authority to acquire land, and really prioritizing converting existing buildings, like hotels and motels, into permanent supportive housing.
Cheaper than building new.
Often, yeah. And exploring alternative construction methods, too, like modular homes to bring costs down.
And given the history of criminalization, reforms there seem essential too.
Absolutely. Adopting policies like the proposed Right to Rest Act, protecting people's basic rights to exist in public spaces, repealing laws that criminalize survival like that LA anti-sitting law, 41.18D, and shifting focus from incarceration to diversion, getting people into treatment and rehab instead of jail.
What about direct support for people who are currently unhoused or on the brink?
Enhancing benefits is key. Expanding programs like SOR, which helps people access federal disability benefits, that's a lifeline. And increasing basic stipends, like the LA County General Relief Grant. It's currently only $221 a month.
Which is less than it was worth in 1982.
Exactly. It's nowhere near enough to survive, let alone find housing. And finally, much better coordination between all the different agencies, housing, mental health, physical health, substance abuse services. They need to work together seamlessly.
It really comes back to that intersection of issues, and fundamentally the racial justice piece.
You cannot separate homelessness in LA from structural racism.
Yeah.
The LA Homeless Services Authority's own reports acknowledge this. Discriminatory housing, employment, policing. It's all interwoven. So ending homelessness, especially the disproportionate impact on Black Angelenos, it has to start with racial justice. It's not just a side issue, it's central.
So we've gone on quite a journey here. Yeah. From grease logs in Seattle.
Right? Who knew?
To the containment policies, the sweeps, the housing crisis in modern LA. We've seen how railroads, economic crashes, deinstitutionalization, and, persistent racial inequity have all shaped this.
It's a lot to take in. Maybe what stands out is just how long this has been unfolding and how policy choices like that containment decision had such long-lasting, devastating consequences, or the irony of urban renewal destroying affordable housing.
Yeah. The challenges feel immense, don't they? These issues are so deeply embedded.
They really are.
But maybe with this shift in public awareness and a clear understanding of the history and what actually works like permanent supportive housing, the path forward is clear.
You'd hope so. The evidence points one way.
It seems to come down to this. Prioritizing housing is a fundamental human right for everyone, instead of relying on temporary fixes or Worse, punitive measures that we know don't work. That seems to be the only real way to solve this crisis.
It really does.
And maybe the thought to leave you with is this. How does a city, any city, balance those pressures of development of economic growth with what feels like a profound moral obligation to house and protect its most vulnerable residents? That tension seems to be at the heart of this whole story.